right, I think we'll get started today. Welcome, everybody. People are still filtering in to the session, but I think we'll go ahead and get moving. My name is Joe Benish. I'm a past president of the Downtown Chamber of Commerce, and I help with some facilitation around some of the things that have been happening virtually with the chamber environment. Today, we have a kind of an exciting presentation on the new U.S. Courthouse, and we've got some great panelists to kind of talk through that. Before we get started, though, I just want to remind everybody of their Zoom etiquette, making sure that you're muted if you're not presenting or asking a question, and to utilize the chat function as much as possible, and I'll help facilitate some of those questions as we get to the Q&A period after the presentation itself. So before we have the speakers introduce themselves or the panelists introduce themselves, I want to turn it over to Jennifer to do kind of a general welcome and recognize some of the sponsors we have. So Jennifer, would you like to do that?
Thank you, Joe. I'd love to. Welcome everybody to Downtown DIG. It stands for Development Insights Group, and this is just such a great program that the Downtown Chamber is able to offer its members. It wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So I always like to take just a moment at the beginning of the program to acknowledge who those are, and please thank them when you see them. Our presenting sponsor of the DIG series is Terracon, and our gold sponsors of the series is the City of Des Moines Office of Economic Development, RIPMA Properties, the Iowa Architectural Foundation, and Mid-American Energy. We also have supporting sponsors this year, American Marking, Confluence Inc., Epic Studio, Hanson Company, Newman Brothers, and Tri-City Electric. And of course, with each program, we have a hospitality sponsor. When we're in person, that is somebody who is welcoming you at the door. Today's hospitality sponsor is Hildreth Construction. You may have seen their logo. Again, please reach out and thank them for supporting this month's program. I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the tremendous help that pulls this program together every month. My colleague, Sheila Mahan, she's on this as well if you want to chat with her. Thank you, Sheila, for everything you do for DIG. Also to Joe Benish, our MC each month and pulling this together in a virtual format, so it's fairly seamless. And to our DIG committee, made up of a number of professionals in Des Moines. Those include Ben Butsky, Scott Meeker, Ryan Moffitt, Dan Corin, Jeff Magner, Carrie Boyens, Matt Weller, Joe Dickinson, Nick Aldrich, Susan Judkins, Nathan Scott, and Zane Muntz. So again, there's a lot of acknowledgments to be had, and please be sure to thank these people when you see them or chat with them today. So back to you, Joe.
Great, thank you very much. So I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. We have three. We have an architect, someone from Terracon who works in the archaeological area, and we have a senior project executive with Ryan Company. So I think what we'll do is just maybe start with Brad, who's a senior project executive at Ryan Company. You just want to take just a few minutes, Brad, and introduce yourself.
Sure, I assume you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you. Thomason, sorry.
Okay.
Thompson, Brad.
Yeah, no. Yeah, my name is Brad Thomason. I recently moved from the Cedar Rapids Ryan office over to Des Moines. Been with Ryan for 14 years. Now I'm a senior project executive. Was in charge of the Cedar Rapids Courthouse, now doing the Des Moines Courthouse, but had a variety of different roles within Ryan over the 14 years, but currently residing now in a new house in Des Moines and enjoying my time here and trying to get this project completed in the next couple of years.
Thank you very much, Brad. Appreciate that. Next is Brian Warthen, project architect with Newman Monson.
Yeah, I'm Brian Warthen from Newman Monson. I am a graduate of Iowa State from 2002, so go State. I'm a project architect, project manager. The hats kind of change sometimes at the office, but the project architect for the Courthouse project and a shareholder of the company since 2015. And some of the kind of local work that I did since moving here in 2011 are the Des Moines Municipal Building for the City of Des Moines and the East 2nd Street parking garage in the East Village.
Thank you very much. Finally, we have Sam Hunt from Terracon.
Hi, like you said, I work for Terracon. I've been doing archaeology and cultural resource management for the past 6 years and doing archaeology for Terracon for the last 4. And I originally worked in the Columbia, South Carolina office and transferred to the Des Moines office last fall, near family. I went to the University of Northern Iowa, so I got my BA, and I'm currently pursuing my master's degree at Adams State University through Colorado.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll move right into the presentation. Would you like me to start the slide presentation? Is that something you guys want to do on your end? It doesn't make any difference to me.
If you got it keyed up, I'd go ahead and handle it on your end.
Great, just let me know when you'd like to advance.
I'll kick things off real quick. We've got this broken into 3 different sections. The first part addresses the design. So you can go ahead and go to the next one we've got the intro and then the table of contents, or what we're going to cover. So Brian will be talking first. Then Sam will cover some of the archaeological components that we've been working with and dealing with. And then I'll finish up with a little unique aspect of downtown Des Moines, as well as where we're at with the construction progress. It's all you, Brian.
All right. So I should have probably included a slide to represent the design team members. There are over 18 consultants for this project and 40+ design team members that work on this project on a regular routine basis. The design architect is actually Max Scoggin, Merrill Elam Architects out of Atlanta. And Newman Munson, we are the architect of record here in Des Moines. Next slide. The Des Moines Federal Courthouse is part of a series of courthouses and courthouse improvements across the country that were funded in the federal budget year of 2016. So this is a little background to the design status here. The design team interviewed for this project in 2017. It was awarded, we were awarded as project architect in late 2017. The design kind of started around 2018, early 2018, maybe late 2017. Kind of the current design status is that there's various packages that have already been completed, including 100% structural package. City site reviews have been completed, and 75% construction documents have been completed as well. These are early packages that allowed for constructions to start early. So most of you are aware, if you're in the downtown, that construction is well underway. So our kind of next phases are working on the 90% CDs, which are a lot of interior development and a few additional exterior items, with trying to get those on completed by late fall. And then 100% construction documents are expected in early 21. Next slide. So kind of design items to kind of talk about. If we go right into the next slide, the project is located between Grand Avenue, Locust Street, and 2nd Avenue, and adjacent to the river and the Riverwalk. So this is a slide we've had for quite some time, but one of the primary site goals for the project is to be a good neighbor to the surrounding historic buildings, the World Food Prize, City Hall being 2 prime examples. Another goal was to create a connection to the surrounding green spaces, and that's why this diagram is up on the screen. You can see that that green space kind of bleeds from property to property, kind of connecting it all together. It's also a building kind of set within the block, similar to all the other adjacent buildings. The courthouse connects to the adjacent green spaces and kind of tries to unify the Riverwalk, the Hanson Triangle to the north, and the courtyard of the World Food Prize to the south. Next slide. In addition to that kind of philosophy of putting the building within the city block, within kind of a building in a park setting, the site and security are features that were critical to get correct. It was stressed early on to not have this look like a fortress. And site and security is very important to this project being a federal building, a federal courthouse. So the building's set back from the curb lines about 50 feet. That's the minimum on the west and the south. So a little further on the north, a little further on the east. But 50 feet is kind of the zone that is considered for blast design, where it kind of starts to change the design of the building. So within that 50-foot zone, there's a landscaping zone used for security features. We have the use of berms and biocells, a grading, and a tree placement were all kind of utilized to reduce the need for security bollards. And I think we ended up with 5 total, maybe 6, which is a good success. The design team also worked with the city to integrate with the Des Moines city street plans. So we've included bump outs at the intersections. We've added ADA parking to the block. And then kind of if you go into the next slide, it's an image of the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And this kind of is not really a nice image to show, but this is why that 50-foot setback is so important. So the farther we can be away from the street, the easier it is to design for progressive collapse as the blast impacts are reduced. And it's this bombing in Oklahoma City that drove many revisions in the blast design and progressive collapse criteria that is now used in federal standards. So that not only are we kind of following the historic nature of having the project set within the city block, it was advantageous for us for the 50-foot setback as well. Next slide. We've kind of included this just, well, as an architect, it's interesting, but hopefully it's interesting for everybody else as well. But it's a general diagram of the organizational structure of a federal courthouse. So this is out of a diagram, so it's not our specific one. But one of the main reasons why the Des Moines Federal Courthouse was funded in 2016 was the security issues that were apparent in the existing facility. The key to safe and secure courthouses is providing distinct circulation paths for the public, which are the restricted corridors for judges and staff, and also secure corridors for prisoners. And the key to this is that none of the paths cross. And if you were to get an actual tour of the day-to-day of the courthouse that exists today, that there's a lot of cross pollination of people that isn't necessarily a good thing. The organizational relationship that you see here kind of layered with the program of this specific facility and layered with the site specifics kind of guide our design. The next slide, kind of an overview here, is we have 9 courtrooms in the courthouse plus an associated judges' chambers, 1 appeals court chamber and a library, grand jury space. We have the clerks for bankruptcy, clerks for district space. We include the probation spaces, and then we have the U.S. Marshal spaces as well. So we've included a judicial education center on the northeast corner on level 1 that is visible from the exterior, and all the secure parking is tucked away below grade, hidden from the site. The design team focused on making public accessibility a key component, taking into consideration that this is a highly secured building. The next slide kind of shows the site again. So the design is easily accessed from Grand on the north, or Grand, Locust, with gentle sloping sidewalks that flank the east lawn. These sidewalks lead you to the covered portico, which is protecting you from the weather and gently directs you to the main entry and the security station, which is that piece that kind of bumps out there. That's a 2-story portico, or a 2-story kind of porch, as some have described it, kind of overlooking the east lawn and overlooking the east towards City Hall and the east towards the Capitol building. The next slide is of the east elevation. This is the view from the river. You can, kind of an imaginary spot because you're kind of floating above the river. You can kind of see in the bottom there that there's an actual, the flood wall is there. So this is a spot you would be hovering. But nonetheless, this is the east elevation. You can start to see the order and the rhythm and the dignity of the facade, which was something that was being stressed. They wanted the dignity of the courthouse. And this is kind of a modern interpretation of the adjacent historic buildings. So in simple terms, there's a base, which is the glass kind of 2-story space, a middle and a top. and that kind of reflects the surrounding architecture. And it's further broken down with the definition provided by the windows. The next elevation, the next slide, is the west side view from 2nd Avenue. And what's interesting about this site is it's highly visible from all directions, so there is no backside to this project. The west facade is just as important as any other facade, and it has the same order and symmetry and rhythm as the east. You can kind of start to see further logic and ordering of the building. The 2-story spaces kind of in the middle are expressed differently, and that is where the courtroom floors are. So the logic of the building is kind of represented in the skin. You can start to see the landscape again and how important it plays in defining the architecture. It's kind of a building sitting on a plant of trees. That's kind of how it's been thought of through its conception. The next image is the last one I have for design. It's the southwest corner, looking east onto Locust, and you can kind of see the building in its full size and kind of full greenery on the bottom. And I will pass this over to Sam now.
All right, thanks, Brian. So if we could go to the next slide. Keep going. And one more. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why I was there and what I did. So I did archaeological monitoring of the project during ground moving activities for the courthouse. And that began back in the fall of 2019. And I did that along with the lead archaeologist, Suzanne Reese. And go to the next slide. So monitoring was required due to federal involvement in the project and to comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which protects historic properties that are eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. So the presence of known archaeological resources in the area and the property's location near historic downtown Des Moines deemed monitoring archaeologists necessary. So after an initial archaeological survey of the property, a programmatic agreement for archaeological monitoring was created in coordination with federal agencies and local authorities. So an important component of the project was careful excavation over Bird's Run sewer, which runs underneath the property. And that sewer was built in 1893 and is considered eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. So it was very important not to damage the sewer during excavation and construction. So to understand the archaeology of the project, it's important to know the history of the land. So in the image on the bottom left, you can see the 1883 sandboard where a creek used to run through the property before Bird's Run sewer was constructed. And then since then, the property has held the Des Moines Coliseum in the first half of the 20th century, and then the YMCA in the latter half. In the photo on the right, you can see the YMCA foundations, which were overlying Bird's Run, which had to be very carefully removed to not damage the sewer. Next slide. So in addition to monitoring Bird's Run, we also watched excavations throughout the property in case any unknown historically significant objects were present. We did this by looking for and collecting historic age artifacts, looking for intact cultural layers and structural remains. So an important part of what we do as archaeologists is looking at soil layers as clues to past human habitation. This can be as subtle as a stain in the dirt. In a typical archaeological excavation, this process is much slower and meticulous. So in a situation we are just monitoring, it was really important to have good communication with the excavator to remove the soil in a way that allowed us to examine what was happening under the ground. So in the photo on the left, you can see how the excavator has pulled back an even layer, allowing us to see what was going on in the soil culturally and collect the artifacts that were popping up on the surface. So in the photo on the right, you can see the many layers of fill that were present on the property. And next slide. So here's the fun part. I could share some photos of artifacts that we found. So during excavation, we collected several thousand artifacts, and these included architectural materials, glass containers, ceramics, metal, leather, and wood. And these are just a few of our artifacts from our preliminary analysis that give a good sampling of the time range that we've observed so far. So in that first photo of the bottle on the left is a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which was a medicine made for babies beginning in the mid 19th century to the early 20th century. And like most medicine back then, it mostly contained morphine and alcohol. And you can see a vintage ad for that same medicine on the bottom left. The middle bottle is actually made of ceramic. It's a stoneware ink bottle from the 19th century, which would have been used to refill glass inkwells. And then on the right, we've got a late 19th century to up until Prohibition liquor bottle from a company in Chicago. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the first one on this slide is a old Coke bottle. It says Des Moines Coca-Cola Bottling Company, and it dates to the early 20th century. We found a lot of soda bottles on this property. The middle photo is a fragment I managed to pull off of a newspaper from dates to April 11th, 1957, and I believe this is from the Des Moines Tribune, which ran up until 1982. And in this last photo is one of the more recent artifacts that came out, which is a 1979 7-Up can. And so archaeological monitoring is still ongoing as construction continues at the courthouse. So I'm sure there'll be more artifacts to come. And that's the end of what I have for you guys.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Sam alluded to a federal project. Ryan Companies interviewed and was awarded the project in 2018. And this project is part of a GSA. And if you don't know GSA, they're General Services Administration. They are the landlord for every federal agency in the country. So they're one of the largest landlords in the world. But we are a pilot project for bringing the contractor on board early. So when we were hired, their design had not even started yet. So we have proposed a process that Newman Monson and the design group was working with us to accelerate and overlap the completion of design and construction, which has really allowed us to get started and project a completion date 11 months faster than if we would have followed a traditional process that the GSA follows. In addition, we're a pilot project for operational excellence. So the goal between design and construction is to turn over a building that minimizes the operational costs for the building throughout the next 50 to 100 years. So those are both pilot projects. That this is the first time they've been enacted on a national level. So we get to learn as we go. Those federal requirements are in the contract, but also they involve the archaeology that we were doing that Sam was just alluding to. If this would have been a private project, none of that would have had to have happened. We could have gone and dug a hole. So I want to talk a little bit more about Bird's Run because it's something we've been hyper aware of for the last year and a half. We were working with Terracon and a consultant they brought on board, Impact 7G, and then another consultant that we hired, Trek Design Group, to do a little bit of fact finding on Bird's Run so that we tried to mitigate any risks we might have since we were building on top of it. So go ahead and go to the next slide. And the site is outlined on the right side, and you can see where the old Bird's Run creek bed used to run through the site. And what I wanted to cover on this, I just thought it was very interesting from a historic perspective that a lot of people probably didn't understand, but Des Moines, the metro downtown area has been filled in. So Bird's Run used to flood all the time. And it actually was a little bit of a sanitary run as well as storm sewer. So as it would flood, you can imagine what would happen with the things that were flowing down there. But that became an eyesore and a hazard for the the city. So as development started to occur, that's when the city decided they needed to start filling that in. So that's where those layers of development and that were being monitored that Sam was looking at come into effect. So go ahead and go to the next one. So the quote on the left was from the study that was done that talked about the cesspool that was Bird's Run was becoming known as, and that a 7'9" brick storm sewer was constructed running through the site. It also runs through a lot of downtown Des Moines. That has been there since 1895. It's still there. It's been worked on, but we were supposed to tear down the remains of the YMCA that had been imploded on top of this storm sewer. We had to remove what was left from the YMCA, and then now we're building a new building on top of it. So it's in our best interest not to collapse that sewer, as you can well imagine. So go ahead and go to the next one. So what the Sanborn map that Sam alluded to, the 1921, shows that the whole area has been filled in from that 1895 period on forward. So now what you see on the site is what started in 1920. It's at that elevation with Grand, Locust, and Second around it. Go ahead and go to the next one. So this is the bottom of this image. The orange is really the cross section of the site, and what we're doing is looking toward the river. So the orange shows what the original creek bed would have been roughly before any work was done to it. If you approximate where it says Noah Creek, that's roughly where the Bird's Run, the brick storm sewer, was then constructed and started to fill around it. So you have different layers in the different colors as it was gradually filled in until you get to the fill layer number 1 at the top, where that is what we were handed when we started construction on the site. So every time we cut across one of those layers, if we're going to be approaching it, that's when we give Terracon a call and say, okay, we need you to come in and keep an eye on things as we're going down through those layers to make sure we don't inadvertently find something. Because part of the plan that was submitted with the State Historic Preservation Office covers what happens if we do find something, and that includes human remains. So it's we have a lot of eyes on the project, and we're pretty well aware of what we need to be looking for, but we will take all the help we can get. Go ahead and go to the next one. So as you can imagine, the city of Des Moines was curious about us putting a building on top of their storm sewer and whether or not any damage would occur. So we actually had a 3-dimensional scan completed inside the storm sewer to document the condition that it was in after we had all our foundations done, so we could verify that nothing had happened to it. So the colored line going through the site is actually piecing together that 3D scan to identify the exact routing of the storm sewer, because there wasn't a map showing exactly where it went, since it's roughly 20 feet underground. That this is the first time dimensionally, as far as depth and width and height, it's been documented to this high level of detail. I'll go ahead and go to the next one. So on the left is when they went into the storm sewer, some photos, and we actually have 3-dimensional, we have video, and they did 3D photos of it, which I can't really replicate here, but they went in at 2nd Street and started working their way toward the river. And what's interesting, you can see that the water starts to get a little deeper as they're moving toward the river beds, because it starts to slope down. So the one on the right is as they're getting closest to the flood wall. Now, what's interesting is the middle one, you see kind of a flat spot instead of the round or an arched vault. That's actually the bottom of the YMCA swimming pool. When it was built, it was actually built on top of Bird's Run, which we left that piece in place. Obviously, we took out what we needed to, but it was rather interesting that the deep end of the pool actually sat and they removed a piece of bridge run in order to put that in place. So I'm not sure who thought that was a good idea, but it worked and it's still there, so we're in good shape. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I'll talk a little bit where we're at with construction. I could show you 500 pictures. I chose not to do that. I'll just give you a snapshot of where we're at real quick. So go ahead and go to the next one. If you drive by the site, you'll see what's going on pretty readily. We're actually pouring second floor columns as I sit here. I am located right now in the White House, as we call it, the 2-story wood building that we put up. So we have a number of people located in here. COVID has not really slowed us down, fortunately, knock on wood. We have been fortunate in that regard. But where we're at right now is getting ready to complete the structure of the second floor. The columns that are on the second floor are getting started. What you're seeing in the photo on the right, we call them the mega columns. If you recall on the renderings that Brian showed, there are 6 exterior columns that are about 30 feet tall at the front entry, forming a bit of a porch. 2 of those are standing in place right now, ready for concrete whenever we get ready to pour those. We're working through mock-ups of what it will look like because they are exposed concrete, and we want the finish of that column to be the highest level we can get and we can achieve with concrete. So 2 of those, they'll be interesting when they get done because they'll be freestanding until we get the 3rd floor on top of them, but they're rather intimidating from a construction point of view. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This isn't a very exciting picture, but it's a concrete structure we're putting in place. So you have to put in shoring for the formwork for the concrete, then you pour the concrete, and then you have to put in reshoring, which you have to support what you're putting above that. So it's a forest of supports right now underneath the concrete, and once we get 3 stories up, we can start to remove that and do work on the interior. So it's if anybody's familiar with the Hard Rock Hotel down in New Orleans that collapsed, they had issues with their shoring. So we are doing this absolutely the correct way. It's all engineered, but it's a laborious process, but it allows us actually to move a little faster once we remove those. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is the view on the right is actually taken from the tower crane. I think it was last week when we were doing the first elevated deck pour. So it's roughly 1/3 of the structure for that floor. The dark rectangle in the bottom portion is actually an opening in the floor that would be a view down into the front foyer and entry lobby. But we've got a number of different cameras set up around the site, and this one happens to be from the tower crane looking down. So it gives you a little bit of a bird's eye view of a portion of the building anyway. Go ahead and go to the next one. And these last few slides, I wanted to show a little bit about, from a construction point of view, technology. So the coordination is a collaborative effort between the construction and design team. And what it is 3-dimensionally creating the building in the computer. Design does that anyway, but when the construction gets involved, it's actually done with a different level of detail. So what you're seeing is an image of the first floor looking down at all the different systems within the building and working the coordination so that they don't interact with each other. Yes, somebody just chatted clash detection, bingo. Go ahead and go to the next one. So we look for things that are going to run into each other and prevent that before it ever happens in real life. As an example, the photo on the right, what's circled is a hanger for a pipe down in the basement level. Those are located in the model. So 3-dimensionally in this virtual environment, we drop those in place. We know what elevation they're at. We know what the spacing is. Then we put them in place when we're pouring the structure. And when the piping comes out, those are already set and good to go. So you don't have to work overhead trying to hang pipe and put hangers in. It's all planned in advance and allows them to prefabricate the largest pieces possible to get them in place. and you don't have to go out there with a tape measure. Everything's done before it ever shows up on the site. Go ahead, next slide. The other component I wanted to show is when we get ready to pour concrete for the floors, we have all the reinforcing. We have embeds for the exterior skin of the precast concrete, the windows and curtain wall glazing that's going to be mounted to the structure. So what we've done, what you do is you have to place those embeds before the concrete's put in place. You frame openings for stairs, elevators, and ductwork. You do all of that work and measure it. And then normally you have somebody stumbling around, walking over rebar, and really dangerous environment trying to verify that before you pour concrete. What we're doing now is we fly a drone the morning before the pour, and it takes a 3D image and overlays it with what we've done three-dimensionally. And then, so the bottom picture, you can see the actual overlay pre-pour. They verify, they look for things that are wrong or not in the right location or are missing. And then they send us a report, and then we fix that right before the pour. So we all this is about a 4-hour turnaround. Go ahead and go to the next slide. It saves a lot of labor. So a piece of the report they sent to us, this is a plumbing item. The picture on the right, the red circle is what was in the model for a pipe going through the floor. And the kind of fuzzy light gray that it's sitting on top of is what's actually in place. So something changed, and a larger pipe was put in place for some reason, which could mean that's probably the correct one, but it didn't get changed in the model. But what it's pointing out is it's not going to fit in the wall that's in the model. So when we go out there, it's 3 3/4 inches is what it was planned to be, but it's now at 7 1/4. So it's telling us, showing us all this stuff before we ever bury it in concrete. So it makes the changes much easier and quicker to do than finding it out after the fact. And go ahead, next slide. Just high overview of the schedule. In very big chunks, February of next year is when we will actually get started on interior work. And June of 2021 is when you'll start to see the exterior envelope go on with the precast concrete and windows. July, we'll finish up the entire structure. It's a 6 stories, and a 7th story is actually the penthouse. But it's really the size of about an 8-story building because of the height of some of the floors. January of 22, that's when the envelope is complete. That entire time we're still working on interiors, and then our substantial completion date to turn the building over to the government for them to start their move-in is November of 2022 is what the target is right now. And we're hoping to beat that if possible. So I believe next slide kicks it off for Q&A.
I see some questions already in the group chat, which I could address a couple of those already. So Tim asked if the exterior grounds will be accessible 24/7, specifically the Riverwalk. And yes, the exterior grounds are accessible. The north, the west, and the south have the sidewalk along the street. There's probably not too much interaction with the public that will be going into the site. But on the east side, yes, the public lawn, it is a kind of a public gesture, a public lawn that kind of runs right into the Riverwalk, right alongside of it. So that is kind of accessible. And then there was another question about a circulation path. And yes, this is very similar to how Polk County Criminal Courts was laid out. So it is kind of the 3 distinct security corridors.
There was also a question that was sent to me privately. Maybe this is a question for Sam. Were the artifacts you found inside the building, or were they turned up from digging?
It's pretty churned up. Everything was really mixed in the soil throughout the whole project. So not so much in the YMCA Foundation area. Outside of that, yeah, it's definitely been churned up and disturbed pretty heavily.
Thank you. Susan had a question also. You know how many pilot projects where the contractor is hired first are being conducted by the GSA, and do you expect this will become a typical project delivery format?
Remains to be seen. As far as I know, we were the first, and I think they may have one or two others going on where the contractor was hired prior to design starting. That is not their normal process, so this is under a lot of scrutiny. We're trying to document the process as best we can to show what the benefits are. And I guess what I assume they'll do is evaluate that after the fact and determine whether it was worth it or not. But I think being 11 months ahead of schedule from what we normally would be is a good case study already.
Other questions for our panelists? Go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself or type them into the chat.
I have a question for Sam. So when you set out to be an archaeologist, an archaeology crew chief, did you think you would land in Des Moines, Iowa?
I didn't expect to, but it was a place I wanted to be, certainly. But it's only a job that takes me all over the place.
I bet. Interesting work.
Mm-hmm.
Those artifacts seem like that some of those were in really good shape. That's why I kind of wondered if they were underground or not.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of them were still intact. So it's lucky.
Other questions? Looks like our panelists stumped everybody. That's usually a sign of a good presentation. So
It was a very good presentation.
It was.
Thanks.
Well, if there are any other questions or anything for our panelists, I'm sure they'd be willing to type in their contact information. If you'd like to have more information, please reach out to them. Other than that, I think I'll turn it over to Sheila and Jeff to kind of say some closing words before we break up today. I have been recording this, and I will make sure that it gets sent over to the chamber and posted so that we can spread the word about this to get people involved, because these are very valuable sessions to kind of learn about what's happening downtown. But again, I'm Joe Benish, own the Ingenuity Company. Just happy to be with you today. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Sheila and Jeff to kind of take us home.
Hey, certainly. Well, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank Ryan Companies, Newman Munson, and Sam here with Terracon for sharing their story today about the federal courthouse. And also the folks on the DIG committee that were behind setting this project up, this presentation up. And so Nick Aldrich did most of the heavy lifting here, and he's an employee with Ryan Company. So he had some insight here behind the scenes to help get this presentation set up. So wanted to give a shout out to him and appreciate everybody's efforts in pulling this together.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I was just going to thank you and the DIG committee. You guys have just done an amazing job all year long in finding these interesting topics and getting the right people to do the presentations. And this has just been, how's this for insights, right? There were some construction explanations there that I never would have imagined goes into something like this. So that was really interesting. And ditto on the thank you to Brad and Brian and Sam for taking the time to be willing to share this with all of us. And one last, well, thank you to Joe Benish always for doing these. He's just really talented and adds just that last little detail level that I wouldn't know how to put onto this. So thank you for doing that for us, Joe. And the last thing that I was going to close with is this is Jennifer Chittenden's last dig event. As probably most of you know, Jennifer is leaving, so I just wanted to say farewell to Jennifer as well. She's leaving on October 23rd, so she'll be here for about another week and a half. Is it next Friday? Is that your last day? Yeah, so Jennifer has been with us for a long time and taking the chamber to some really great places, so we appreciate that, and we'll miss you. All right, with that, everybody have a good day. Thank you again for joining. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.